North Carolina has a new law designed to protect free speech on public college campuses. And that's good news to our next guest. Jenna Robinson is president of the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal. Welcome back to the program.
Hi, Mitch.
So tell us what the Campus Free Speech Act does.
It does several things. First and foremost, it directs the Board of Governors to make sure that our campuses no longer have unconstitutional speech policies. And some of the policies that are on the books right now in North Carolina universities include restricting speech to a very small area of campus and restricting the kinds of things that you can say in sometimes arbitrary and unusual ways.
And I understand that part of this law calls on the University of North Carolina system to have some sort of policy in place to make sure that all the campuses are complying with this.
Right, exactly. And a lot of our campuses already are. Some of them were kind of early movers on this. UNC Chapel Hill has gotten rid of all its unconstitutional speech codes, a while ago now. But we had several universities just this year, knowing that this policy was coming, go ahead and clean up their speech policies. And so we do have a good idea of what's needed and some good examples that the system can follow in order to make sure that students have access to free speech on campus, with reasonable limits.
For people who haven't been following this very closely, what were some of the types of things that campuses were doing that were unconstitutional, that were blocking people from using their free speech?
So one of the most recent examples happened at NC State University when a Christian organization was set up in the Brickyard and went and asked students if they could pray together in the Brickyard, which is a kind of a gathering space on campus. And the university administrators told them that they couldn't do that because they didn't have the right permissions to do so. And it was kind of, they essentially said it was soliciting.
They hadn't filled out some paperwork.
Right, they hadn't filled out the right paperwork. In any case, the Christian organization then sued the university, and the university lost and had to pay the organization's legal fees. And so that's the most recent, very clear-cut example. Another example recently was that one of our universities had a free speech zone that was essentially cordoned off in a really tiny, inconvenient area of campus. And so when you have a free speech zone like that, it means that's the only place on campus you can do something like hand out a pocket constitution. And so when you're preventing students from speaking freely or handing out materials except from one little spot on campus, that's another example that we see pretty frequently.
So you're talking about acres and acres of a college campus, and only one little tiny out-of-the-way spot was the spot where people could have free speech.
Right, exactly.
The movement to get this Campus Free Speech Act in place, is this something that people outside the university system saw a problem and said, look, we need to have a law that makes sure that this doesn't happen?
Absolutely. And it's not something that just happened in North Carolina. There has been a nationwide movement. Obviously, we've seen some problems outside of our state that are much more severe than what's gone on here in North Carolina. And those problems became evident when the students started shouting down speakers, physically assaulting speakers, preventing them from getting their message across. And it became kind of a de facto way to prevent speech. Students could threaten to riot, and administrators would back down and say, okay, well, we won't have that speech. So all of those movements to prevent speakers from saying things that students didn't want to hear, that was really part of the impetus for this.
We are speaking with Jenna Robinson, who is president of the Martin Center for Academic Renewal, one of the groups that was very interested in this Campus Free Speech Act. I imagine a lot of people are going to hear us and say to themselves, well, this sounds like an easy proposition. Campus free speech, everyone should be for this. This law should have passed in a couple of days and almost unanimously. But there was some pushback. Why are some groups opposed to this?
There was some pushback. One of the reasons for pushback is there was a provision in the bill to punish those who cut off the free speech of others. So if you were one of those protesters and you either physically or by screaming prevented someone else from exercising their free speech rights, it laid out how that person would have to be punished, up to and including expulsion. And so there was some pushback saying that, it's really not the General Assembly's place to decide what the punishment will be. And so that part was stripped out. It still makes it clear that preventing a person from speaking is against the law, but it doesn't lay out the punishments for doing that. And so that was one of the objections. One of the other objections from the university was a provision on institutional neutrality. And there were two parts of that provision. One part is still there, and the part that's still there says that universities can't require students or faculty to sign on to any statements of belief. The other part was that institutions themselves had to be politically neutral on kind of policy questions of the day, and that part was removed. So institutions can still take stands on political questions, and that was something the university really pushed back on, getting that provision taken out, because a lot of people in today's universities do want to be political, and many departments themselves have statements affirming their commitment to fighting for social justice, for example. And if the institutional neutrality provision had gone through in its strongest form, the university wouldn't have been able to do that.
This law has just come into law. I would have said signed into law, but Governor Roy Cooper decided not to sign it. It actually went into law without his signature. So we're very early in the process. What is the Martin Center going to be watching for to ensure that this Campus Free Speech Act actually acts the way it should?
Right. So the next part is that the Board of Governors has to formulate their policy. The actual wording of the policies was left up to that board. And we'll be watching to see that the board adopts policies that really do protect student and faculty speech to the greatest extent possible, still in keeping with the rules of a campus. Obviously, a university classroom is not a place for unbridled free speech. A university classroom is a place for learning, first and foremost, but to the greatest extent possible.
You follow the university's Board of Governors fairly closely. Do you get a sense that the members of the board are on board with this idea of protecting free speech?
Absolutely, they are, and I think that they are ready and willing to look for all of the sources to make sure that they have their policies exactly as they should be to really protect student speech.